Hello, and welcome to TA Intel, a podcast about the business of small business support. Each episode of TA Intel offers practical insights on leadership and professional development for the people who run and deliver services in entrepreneurial support organizations. I'm your host, Christian Conroy. I have over 30 years of experience in leading organizations that enable small businesses to start, grow, survive, and thrive. I provide leadership and strategic support to economic development and educational organizations across the country. I'm joined in this episode by Mike Daniel and Kyle Hensel. Mike is the director of the Orange County Inland Empire SBDC network, and Kyle is the director of continuing education with the Georgia SBDC. In this show, we discuss how leaders of entrepreneurial support organizations can strategically position their organization to build mutually beneficial corporate partnerships. Let's hear from Mike and Kyle. So Mike Daniel and Kyle Hensel, welcome to TA Intel. I'm looking forward to hearing more about your experiences in building mutually beneficial corporate partnerships because, as you know, funding diversification is a major priority for many entrepreneurial support organizations. So to help us get started, Mike, why don't you talk a little bit about, what corporate funding can make possible that other funding sources may not be able to?
Yeah, thanks, Christian, and thanks for having me on. I think it's such an important topic, right? How to raise funding that I'll start with just restricted versus, unrestricted funding. We want as much unrestricted funding as possible so that we can do a lot of new things. We can do a lot of bigger things. We can also have a rainy day fund, right? When the government pays us slow or, we want to grow an extra center or two or be in an area. So, it really allows us to do things that, our restricted money does not.
Kyle, what's it done in Georgia?
Well, and again, thank you, Christian, for having me also. Having that extra money allows you to do things that you otherwise would not be able to try. Yes, there is the core mission and opening centers and maybe being able to put people into a center that you wouldn't have had there otherwise, but it allows you to maybe try some different classes, open a different center or different expertise in order to help out the small business owners that we are serving on an everyday basis. So it also brings in a lot of goodwill for our universities and our partners. So there's so many different things that happen because of bringing in a gift. And I know sometimes we just focus on hey, there's some extra resources that we're bringing in, but there's a lot more benefits than meet the eye.
Okay. Yeah, no, and actually, I think we'll get into that in a little bit more as we have this conversation. But, what I'm thinking is, before we get into that, let's maybe set out some of the ground rules and parameters about what it is exactly that we're talking about. So, Kyle, when we say corporate funding, what are we really talking about? I mean, is it sponsorship? Is it grants, bank CRA funding, philanthropy, supplier diversity programs, something else? I mean, so how should people be thinking about what corporate funding is?
Absolutely. And I almost feel like that's a trick question at times because every different group of people has a different way of how they describe the dollars that are flowing from their organization. So, I mean, even when you're talking about a bank, it could come in the form of CRA funding. It could come in the form of a grant, or it could come as the form of a sponsorship. So there are different pockets of money that are out there from different corporate organizations, and they could be classified as many different things. So to answer your question, yes, when we are talking about corporate funding, it could be a sponsorship, a grant, CRA funding, supplier diversity, or just the catch-all philanthropy, which is bringing in the external dollars. And as Mike mentioned earlier, the hope is that it could be unrestricted as much as possible so that we can do what we need to with the funds.
What about for you, Mike? I mean, what do you, anything that you would add to that in terms of what listeners should think about in terms of when, we talk about corporate partnerships and corporate funding?
Yeah, so we are talking about all these, but Kyle really hit on something that is key, I think, probably at least to the two of us at this point in time, is that you could go to the same potential organization and get funding in 3 different buckets from 3 different types of funders that don't even talk to each other. So there's a lot of doors to open, and sometimes you've opened a door and there's multiple other doors to open. And ultimately it needs to be beneficial to them and to us.
So Mike, are you talking about, like, for instance, like you might go to Well, let's take a bank
Yep.
as an example. And so they may have, like, if we're talking about like JP Morgan Chase, they might have a, philanthropic arm that provides grants to support economic development, but then they might also have marketing dollars that they're using to sponsor a training program for businesses. Is that what you mean in terms of where you can get multiple pots of money from one entity?
That's exactly what I mean, right? And you may even get to to a branch level where they want to fund in a
Wow.
specific area to a
Wow.
specific demographic, right? To where
Okay.
you're doing a training program or you're touching a client that they want to touch. It's all of those things.
So really what you're saying too is, think big and think small, right?
Yes.
Okay. That's interesting. All right. Well, I guess you mentioned something else in the beginning there, and I noted it about, unrestricted. So there's, this perception that corporate funding is more flexible than government grant funding. Have you found that to be true in your experience? And does it come with restrictions or expectations that, maybe people aren't thinking about?
It definitely comes with expectations.
Okay.
Let's start there. All money will
Right.
come with an expectation of something. But a lot of, if we're talking banks, right, that's one side of the house, and CRA dollars where maybe it is, they want to service, a specific group of businesses, or they're looking for underserved areas, and that's one set of money that there's other money that we get from a lot of corporate that want a specific outcome, or they want a specific program built for an audience. Like we just did a beauty program in our high desert area, which is a rural area, and that's where they wanted to touch because they're trying to grow into that area as that area is starting to grow, and they wanted a specific amount of training done, and they wanted us to hit a certain target of number of people served. So that, as long as I think it's not taking you off of your mission and it's taking you where you want to go, it's all good money. It's when it starts taking you, it derails you from what you're doing. I think that's when you really need to take a step back and say, is this really what we want to be doing?
Did you say beauty?
Yeah. So in California, right, in Southern California particularly, we have a lot of beauty colleges. So,
Colleges.
estheticians, manicurists, hairstylists all go through a training program. And we have a law in California where you either are an employee or you're a business owner, but you can't be a contractor. So they either start their own business or they become an employee. And so we have a lot of this demographic really kind of graduating out of these schools, and they have to start a business.
Oh, interesting. Okay. All right. Kyle, what's been your experience? I mean, have you found that corporate money is less restrictive than grant money?
I wouldn't say it's less restrictive, but you've got to keep in mind who the audience is that you're getting the money from. So as was mentioned earlier, it could be that you're dealing with a local branch, or you're dealing with the charity arm, the foundation of the actual funder, and all of them have completely different expectations. When you're dealing with a local branch, you might be dealing with a commercial lender and a bank manager who their end goal is that they want ROI. They want more customers to appear, even though that's not what a true, gift really is thinking about. But they do have expectations for ROI. But sometimes you're dealing more with the foundation, and they're looking for the greater good and how to help out a large population of people. So a lot of things are agreed upon up front when it comes, especially to some of the larger gifts. You know exactly what the goal is, you know what the donor intent is, and you need to follow that all the way through. So flexible is kind of the wrong word, because the goals are, firmly put in at the very beginning, but how you accomplish that goal may be a little bit different as you're going through the duration of the project. You might be more flexible to achieve your goals later on, and how you actually do the program or do the outcome.
Yeah. And if you wanted a couple of examples, I'll give you one that was really interesting. And we're in this third year now of a program. In our region, we really got into international trade. It's a small area. We're really focused on medical device, small manufacturers, and really kind of taking our businesses to Southeast Asia. That's kind of the connection for our university. And so we went to a partner of our dean of the College of Business, and they're a lender and a bank, and said, they're a smaller bank, and said, what if we were able to help your top clients understand where the opportunities were for them to grow? You pay for them to go on the trade mission with us. We give them customized reports and one-on-one consulting, and then you give a donation to our university in the same manner. So we're on our third year. We're getting ready to go to Mexico City. We'll have 20 businesses going with us. So they fund our program. They pay for their businesses to go. The value add to them is that they're giving a value add to their customers that no other lender could do. So they're keeping their customers happy. They're helping them grow, and they're helping us at the same time. And it's a win all the way around.
Yeah, no, that's great. Yeah, Kyle, can you give us an example like that of what you've done in Georgia?
Absolutely. One program that we're very proud of that we have in Georgia is based on something that a bank has ended up funding for over 10 years at this point. And it was a very large bank. And what they came to us and said is, we have people that are trying to start a business, but really don't know what they're doing, how to write a business plan, and we don't know if they're qualified in the long run. Now, I know that no one that's listening to this probably has experienced any of those things about the audience before, but what we ended up thinking about was, the assets of all the programs that we already had, because we're a firm believer in not reinventing the wheel if we don't have to. And we identified a program that we already had, one that had impact, where we knew that people were getting business starts. And we knew that the bank in this instance wanted a very intensive program with multiple meetings and hours in order to have someone finish a business plan. And we ended up just connecting them with a program that we already had. And at this point, we actually were able to give an award to them earlier this year, as they've now contributed over $600,000 towards this program in the long run. Now, and it doesn't have to be you're getting $100,000 every single year. I mean, things start adding up as you go along. But in the case of this, we knew what their intent was. If they may have customers that they did not want to say no to, but they wanted to give them assistance and help in order to turn them into a great customer. Or the person may realize that starting a business may not be for them in the long run after taking the training. So partnering with us and partnering with a program that really had that long-term impact was a goal of theirs. And the gift, I would like to think, was it's very nice, but it's almost secondary to them because they're helping their customers at the exact same time, as well as helping the SBDC in our case.
It's interesting. You both cited examples where, well, both of you, I guess, both examples were working with banks. But I think the other thing that jumped out at me, and I know is something that people are very interested in, is, the sustainability of funding that you might get. And you both mentioned, if I heard correctly, that these have been awards that you've gotten over multiple years. And is that the norm? Is that unusual? Is there anything because that's kind of like the holy grail, right, that we're all looking for. So any tips or suggestions on how you can build that long-term stability for as part of these partnerships?
Well, I'd say one thing starting out for me is that when you're looking at corporate funding, it's a little bit different than going after a grant. A lot of times when you're looking at corporate funding, it's very relationship driven. And it may take years in order to be able to find the right company to work with and the right deal overall to work on. I mean, even when you're looking at development from a university standpoint, it can take 10 months or longer before someone brings in their first major gift. And that's someone that deals with that full time. So it's a very long-term process to bring in the money. So I'd like to think that when you're working with them, you know them very well by the time that the gift is agreed upon, and the papers are actually signed at that point. And again, the expectations, and in many cases they know what the impact should be based on history. So you're trying to create a win-win situation where they don't want to turn you down in the future because they want that continued impact and that continued relationship. So I think that it does take a little bit more work up front, but if done correctly and really focusing on that relationship long term, it's a win-win for everyone, and they will continue to come back.
Yeah, I'll just add to a little bit to that. It's understanding what will make them successful as a corporation and what they're really investing in. And I would say, almost under promising and over delivering every time, and how you can put them in front of it. I think sometimes we forget. We take the money and we're like, okay, great. And then we never include them again. And then they ask for a report a year later. I mean, that's not success. Success is when they get excited about what you're doing and see the value of what you're providing, that's how you continue to grow it. And really, I think what we want to see is, yes, long-term funding, but also that funding grows over time as well.
Well, speaking of growth, I mean, so for both of these, let's just use these two examples that you each shared. It sounds like there are significant amounts of funding that you're receiving as part of this. Did it start at that high level, or did it start at something small and you built it over time? And what have you had, what's your experience been in terms of where you should start in terms of an amount?
Well, if I could start on that one,
Yeah.
It definitely is different for every single person. No corporate sponsor or funder is coming in from the same situation. Some of them have rules that govern what a first gift could look like. And some of them, it could be that you're dealing with a first level and they can give a certain amount of money. And then if that's successful, it could go up to another level, and which may have some more budgets along the way. In the case of the gift that I was talking about earlier, it started at 5,000, eventually went to 25,000, up to 50,000, has kept going up at that point. The one thing to remember with it is to continue to steward that gift too, and continue to thank them, make them feel like part of the process, celebrate the rewards, even getting, thank you notes from people that benefited from the different things that happened as part of the gift. As Mike was saying, you really want to make them part of the process and really over deliver and make them feel so much a part that even though they were just giving money in a way, they were really shaping people's lives in the process. They are an integral part.
Spot on. So
Did your project start small, Mike, or did you?
It did start
yeah,
smaller than where it's at today. Right. And really, I think where we got them excited is we brought the CEO of the bank with us on the first trade mission. And he's like, oh, I see how this could benefit my clients. And then he comes every single time. Now he's seen his clients interact. He's seen his clients make sales internationally, right? With a whole team. And so again, the value add is minimal for what, these long-term relationships that he's building with his clients. It's also brought value to our host, which is interesting, right? Because now this person's on our Dean's Advisory Board. He's committing other funding that's outside of us. And there's so much opportunity, right, to continue to grow that.
So, you both really, I think, emphasized the importance of relationships. Is that, for somebody who hasn't done this before and they're thinking about it, how to get started, is that the area that they should focus on first, or should they, first, put together like a fundable project, or, come up with a list of targets? I mean, where should people, put their energies initially as they're thinking about trying to engage with corporate funders?
And I would say you need to, one, be able to have an articulate conversation about what you do and what you don't do.
Okay.
And so rather than putting together a single project, I would say put together all the things that you're doing, the areas that you want to grow. It's almost like putting together your strategic plan for where you want to go as a network, put that together and say, well, if you, like for us, right, we're targeting existing businesses that have the ability to do, they're doing currently somewhere between 250,000 and 750,000 and have the ability to get to $1 million. That's our target. So if that aligns with other, corporate funders that want to fund in that area, awesome. We also do a lot of startup. So helping people understand the different types of areas that we can help them start their business, or a certain area or certain demographic. But I think you really have to be sophisticated in what you know. And then I think we probably left off a little bit from before is before you ask for any amount, it's really easy to do a little research on other grants or gifts that they've given to others and find out how much that was, so that you kind of relatively know what that ask could be and what they fund. Because I think, Kyle, you mentioned it, of there's certain, we're talking CRA, well, local CRA, maybe they're capped at $10,000, where statewide CRA, maybe they could do 100,000, national could do 1 million, right? So really kind of understanding where their thresholds are.
Well, if I could build on that too, yes, it is very important to know who you serve and who your market, and are they aligned? Because many organizations have pillars of who they're trying to reach and who they value. But at the same time, all organizations need to know what they can do. So, having an asset list of what programs are potentially sponsorable, or what are the expertise levels of your different advisors or faculty, or knowing what things that you can actually do. So taking a good inventory of what your organization can do, what are the things that you're already doing or things that could be created that could be appealing to an outside organization. And as Mike mentioned too, you can look at some of the other gifts and things that they've supported in the past. Funding organizations love to put their success stories on their websites and talk about all the great things that they did. So there is just a list showing everything that they've done, the areas that they tend to fund in, and it shows, you know, the person who is really giving out that money, the history of who they choose to support. So there's a lot of research that you can do in advance, but researching yourself is incredibly important in the process too.
Yeah, I can certainly relate to that from personal experience. I mean, I can think about, you know, I was working with one potential partner who, you know, I know had a lot of resources backing them up. And, you know, when I pitched them, you know, a price tag on it, it came in, you know, their target budget was about 10% of what I had pitched. And so that really kind of surprised me. But then on the other hand, you know, I just had a kind of, you know, crazy offhanded remark to somebody and they didn't blink and they said, "Oh, that would be fine. You know, we can invest $10 million into this." And I'm like, really? So, I mean, it's helpful to do the research, but sometimes even with that, you know, knowing what their prior history has been, doesn't necessarily always tell you what they're. I mean, I guess the lesson I took away from that is that every project is unique and it's different. And I think it really kind of gets back to Mike's point about, you know, how does that fit within the broader strategy of both your organization as well as what the funder is looking to do. And I guess, you know, the only other comment I would make here, and I'm just curious, again, this is based on my experience, if you've seen something similar, and you know, some of the organizations that I've worked in, I've seen that, or I felt that we oftentimes ask for too little money for the value that we kind of brought to this partnership, because there was this fear that, you know, we didn't want to, well, I don't know what the anxiety was, quite frankly, but what I felt that it did is that, you know, it devalued our brand and value proposition. And I'm just wondering, have you run into that? And if so, you know, well, have you run into that? And if you have, you know, how have you addressed it?
I don't know if you want to start. I'm happy to. Yeah.
I could start. There's times when you go in there and ask too little money. Sometimes it's a self-esteem thing where you don't know if you are to the extent where you can ask that large of a gift. I remember one time when I made a certain ask and I ended up being told ultimately that I was one of the biggest bargains that they had ever seen related to this type of project. And as I knew that it really hurt my feelings in the short term, I'm bringing in the project, I knew that I got a yes at that point and was at least starting the relationship and that we could grow. And then if you over deliver and show the value, you can eventually get the gift up to where it should be. But at the same time, as Mike mentioned earlier, if you start looking at the past gifts and knowing the history of the organization, knowing what their levels are, you may be able to come closer to the real number of what you should be asking. But I would say that most people that do start out asking, they do ask for too little money. And in some cases, they're not even covering the cost of their program. They're just trying to get more money than they had. And that is not necessarily the right approach. Your approach is, you know, trying to cover the cost and then some if you can. So I would say that early on in people's career, yes, they normally do ask for a little bit more money. And as you grow in experience, you know what you can ask. And I would say too, have a good team of people that you can talk to ask for advice, you know, whether it is part of your university or part of your personal network. Other people have gone through these things before, and they may know these individuals. So they may be able to provide feedback. So even if you're new in the world of asking for corporate dollars, someone else has done it before. And there's a lot of other resources online that can help with that also. Mike?
Yeah, you're absolutely right. And sometimes it's okay to ask, like, what were you thinking of the amount to be here? Like, what kind of range or ballpark? It's okay to ask that question. They may or may not answer it, but most of the time they're pretty open. They're not trying to hide anything, from what I found. The other thing too is they will fund different organizations at different levels. I'll give you an example. So we were getting funding from a large lender, CRA funding. We were getting $5,000. We brought on a new host that happened to be our local ethnic chamber. And when I brought them into the conversation, and if the money flowed through them instead of us, they got $50,000. And so fine for us to move the relationship that way. But sometimes it's knowing who your partners are and who they fund at different levels, which that's really interesting. And I would love to dive into that at some other point in time of, how they think of things, but they saw a different pathway through that ethnic chamber than they did through us.
Well, I'm sort of glad you brought up that example, because one of the things that I've been thinking about is, a lot of entrepreneurial support organizations like, SBDCs, you're part of other institutions oftentimes, right? You're part of like a university, a community college, a chamber of commerce, or some other economic, development organization. And, oftentimes they may both or all of them, be pursuing the same potential, funder. Have you, and it's interesting that, in this example, you were able to identify how, rather than you taking the lead, partnering with them, letting them take the lead could lead to, greater resources. Have you run into issues like, internally where you've got maybe multiple entities within the same organization pursuing funding? I mean, how do you manage that kind of coordination so that you're not competing against yourself, and you have a unified message going out to that partner that can maximize the amount of resources that you get?
I would say this is where universities, at least mine, is not good at that.
Okay.
So usually, sometimes there'll be 5 of us all competing for the same thing. The other thing, there are corporations that are off the table for us that are well beyond us at our university, and it's like you cannot go anywhere near them. And if they contact you, you immediately need to contact the other, the person at our university, because we don't touch those, and that's okay. I mean, I think that's a good thing. I think what our university too, what we're trying to teach them, I think similar to the earlier conversation, is that you may get money from a corporation or a lender over here. We can help you get it over here, or use our program as a strength to your pitch, because we touch an audience that most universities don't.
Yeah, you hit the nail on the head on that one. And to answer your first question, Christian, yes, every day we actually have that problem in Georgia of bumping against other departments or other centers that are going after the same pot of money over the same type of person. And Georgia is not as large as California, but we still have 159 counties, and my institution is the land grant institution and is all over the state of Georgia. Well, we have a very centralized database that we do look at all the different gifts, all the different people involved. And if we notice that someone is given money, we know that we cannot approach them. So we will actually talk to members of our university to see if it is okay to actually solicit for any type of external dollars, to make sure that we are not hurting a larger gift or stepping on anyone's toes. But to Mike's point, we can help educate them that money comes from different directions. So one thing that we've seen very much in the past year or so is that they say, oh, a smaller gift here may help us bring in more dollars in a larger gift later on. So one might be more of a local engagement in order to bring in state or national dollars later on. So I think that we've done a very good job as a university, really looking at the idea of how we can benefit each other and grow the amount of gifts coming in if we work together, even though obviously, our technical assistance provider is not the number one goal to bring in money at the university. So we're just a small program, but we like to play our part in bringing in money to the whole and realizing that money for our university is better than no money at all.
Yeah. No, actually, I think that raises a good point that I hadn't even thought about, in terms of preparing for this, is that, we can, and, an entrepreneurial support organization can add value back to its host by, potentially opening new avenues for fundraising that they hadn't been considering before. And just even having that conversation internally and getting them to think maybe more broadly about how they can expand targets for partnerships is helpful to everybody. And that's a great way to also, I think, build, new stakeholders for your organization.
Sometimes it's just wording too. We call our our population clients, they call their population students. So sometimes changing the vernacular. So we call them students when we're talking to other people on campus, and then they all of a sudden understand, like, you're helping a student just in a different way.
Right. Yeah, and one thing to always remember too is that sometimes universities struggle to reach external audiences and reaching the general public, and we do an excellent job of reaching an external market that could use the expertise of the university. So we are opening avenues at the same time. So if a funder is looking at reaching students and other people, we can be a great avenue to work with our university and, as Mike was mentioning earlier, potentially make a gift larger than it was prior for the university.
Okay. So let's just think about this. All right. So, in a very positive notion, you've both been successful in terms of bringing in corporate resources. And so once you get that fund, are there any types of operational realities that kick in that we should be thinking about? I mean, things related to reporting or accounting or brand approvals, staffing, procurement, all that kind of stuff. What's been your experience in terms of things that leaders should be thinking about preparing for in terms of their operations if they get corporate funding?
Yeah. So there's a whole nother side to this,
okay.
right? And that is kind of the back end, making sure that we are, some of what we talked about, it's the relationship, making sure that we're constantly in front of the funder, but also making sure that it goes up on our website. There's success stories. We're doing a press release. We're making sure our university, maybe it's our president or our dean, sends a thank you letter to them more often than not. Inviting them to some things that maybe they weren't even a part of. So my boss does a trade forecast, and he does a regular forecast. So inviting them to other events so that they're getting more entrenched in what we do all the time. Or, we do grand openings, coming. So again, just keeping them top of mind and almost treating them like they're an advisory board of yours, and say, come be a part of our program. Don't just give us money and kind of walk away unless that's what you want, but we want to immerse you in everything we're doing.
Yeah, one thing with a lot of these companies is, even though they don't like to talk about it, ROI can be important to them. So including them in your program, introducing them to your advisors to create a relationship with them. And one thing that was just mentioned, but is so important, is thanking them on a regular basis, not just one time, but continually. The letter from the president, or giving them a simple award at an annual awards banquet, and making a post on LinkedIn and connecting them with the organization. The little ways of saying thank you go a long way. And those are the reasons that people want to come back in the long run, is because you didn't just take the money, you're finding a way to connect with them and help, further their organization. And it makes it show that you are taking an interest in them, not just in yourself.
Yeah. We get a lot of money from different CRA dollars from different lenders. And I can't tell you how many times we've invited them to our program, talked about, our access to capital program, and all of a sudden they're introducing us to their branch managers or their division manager, or they're all of a sudden we're at the bank talking to their lenders saying, here's how we can help your clients. It's such an interesting piece, right? Things that they didn't even necessarily fund us for, but now they're bringing us the clients that we're looking for on top of it. And we're helping them, assist their clients.
And when you do have that connection too, it gives ideas for a future gift or a future program that they want to work on. Because the more you learn about each other, the more you learn the capabilities of each other, it brings more ideas and more avenues of partnership down the road.
Yeah. We're just about to wrap up, and it just dawned on me. We've spent a lot of this conversation talking about CRA. And while, the three of us know what that stands for, others may not. Can one of you just give us a 30-second primer on what is CRA?
Well, since Kyle's getting his PhD in philanthropy, I'm going to let him take this one.
It's not fair. And it's an EDD, not a PhD.
Okay, close enough.
CRA is the Community Reinvestment Act, and it's different dollars that banks are required to give back and invest in their communities. A lot of times it can be involved in mortgages or economic development or certain populations. So it is money that is given back or invested in a community at that point. And most traditionally, we do think about it with financial institutions. So, but again, that's just one of the many ways of bringing in external buckets. And, whether it is, a grant opportunity or a charitable gift. I mean, all of these are possible avenues, and a lot of times all of them for an organization are possible ways that you can partner together.
But for CRA specifically, I mean, if they make if they, donate to or give to an entrepreneurial support organization, that can count towards their CRA requirements, right? I mean, that hasn't changed. That's been pretty consistent.
It can. It's certain. It's different for every organization, and different people have different ways that they certify the dollars and the different things that they're looking for. So it's really important to communicate and talk to the CRA person at a bank and someone that understands their processes, because what may be the case at a big national bank may not be the same at a regional bank, and some smaller institutions may not have to be involved. So again, it's knowing the people and knowing the processes of each individual institution will make a big difference. And if they can connect CRA dollars to any of the other forms of gifts, that's just a bonus, because they've found a way to attach their dollars and fulfill their requirements at the same time.
Do you know offhand if there's a cycle, like does that run on a calendar year or a federal fiscal year in terms of how they get evaluated in terms of meeting their CRA requirements? By any chance, do you know that?
I don't know off the top of my head.
Okay, all right,
Sure.
But the only reason I ask is you just made me think. I remember a couple of years ago I was doing some work and we had an event coming up, and somebody mentioned, oh, such and such bank, still has $10,000 in CRA money that they need to distribute before, the end of whatever the reporting period was. So we were able to capture that to support a conference that we were doing. And I just was thinking, if we knew when that date was, it's go out to the banks, 60 days ahead of time and say, hey, if you got any CRA money left over, we're here.
That is interesting. And that's actually happened. I don't know, Kyle, if it's happened to you, but it's like, oh, we have this, what can we do with this extra money we have?
Yeah.
It's like, we can figure that out.
Mine's never been a large gift, but I have had someone contact me and say, I've got $5,000. I don't know what to do with it. Can we give it to you? And it's like, oh, okay. We can find a way. So, but again, that underscores relationships all the way through, that they think to call you.
All right. Yeah. So one last thing with this, I mean, when you have this funding, are there any issues in terms of how it interacts with the rest of your, budget that you have and other funding sources? I mean, are there any suggestions that you would have for leaders in terms of how they think about how they're going to use these funds compared to like the grant funds that they have to, that funds the majority of their organization? Like, are there certain areas that maybe you should focus on? Like maybe this, you don't put salaries on this. Maybe you put, travel on this, for instance, or something. Yeah. I mean, any thoughts around strategies for people to think about in terms of their spending patterns?
Yeah, so I'll give you a starting point. I love funding for things that we're already doing, that I can park this money and never have to spend it. Mm-hmm. Because we're already doing it, or we're already planning to do it with funding that we already have allocated. So that is the best money, because we also need to have funding just in case there's something that happens. So I would say you need to build up a bank account, right? A savings account, however you want to look at it. That gets you through some cycles that maybe you're not getting your funding paid, or you want to grow, or you want to do some things that you don't have the funding for, or your budget gets cut. So I'm a huge fan of, let's go after some funding that we don't need to spend.
I would agree. And do keep in mind that sometimes there are deliverables as part of the gift. So if you know that you need to spend some money, just make sure that it's budgeted up front. Know exactly what you have to spend and what you can keep to put in that fund for later on. But I am also a big proponent of try to get funding for things that you're already going to be doing anyhow. There are instances where you may create a new program, but existing it to things that you're already doing is always a best case scenario.
So, usually to wrap up these podcasts, I ask for, if there's one or two practical takeaways, for listeners to think about in terms of moving forward. And I think you both just actually offered them. I love this idea of, get paid for what you're already planning to do and get dollars that you don't need to spend. I can't think of better advice to end this with, but I will open it up to you for any other thoughts or comments that you might just want want people to think about as they're considering establishing relationships with corporate partners?
I would say for me, one thing is to always keep your host institution in mind. Whether you're going out and looking for money, you need to be in communication with them throughout the process and knowing, are there any organizations that you should never, reach out to, or ones that are fair game to go out and talk to, or how can you add value to the relationship that's already there? The more you work within the boundaries that are set up at your institution, the better off I think you're going to be in the long run. So you don't want to make anyone angry, but you always want to try to make people happy. So definitely keep your host in mind, and when you're looking for external dollars, and stay in constant communication with them, because if not, it's a recipe for disaster in the long run.
Yeah, that's great advice. And I know we're just talking about corporate, but there are so many other avenues of funding, right? Cities and counties, state government, there's things that we haven't touched on. When I look at corporate, even breaking up corporate from CRA, that's probably two different areas that I would look at differently. Because CRA, I think you're really kind of doing the work you do every day. When you look at a corporation, they typically want to fund you for something specific. And I'd also look, for us, we're at a university, so are you, Kyle. Who are the big, like for us, we're big into food and food service in our program. So 20% of our clients are in that world. Well, we have a couple of huge food distributors that are part of our campus, that service our campus, that also give small grants out, because that's how they make sure that the university is happy with them being there. So like Starbucks and some of our like Cisco, things like that are part of our campus, also give out grants. And so we show them what we do, and we get small grants for that as well. So there's so many different angles, right? So I would say start small, right? Start with a small goal, a couple of things that you can do, and see where it goes, right? Because you may get the door shut on you, or you might be like, door wide open. Let's, because my guess is in a lot of states, there's not a lot of people doing really good work. And it ultimately comes down to the work being done. Yeah.
Well, that's a great way to I think wrap this up, right? So it's start small, but think big, and be proud of the work that you're doing, and look for ways that you can create those synergistic partnerships where it's a win-win for everybody. So I think this has been a really terrific conversation. I think you offered a lot of, I think, really helpful and insightful information that hopefully folks that are listening to this might be able to use and adapt as they look for opportunities to bring in new resources to diversify their own organization. So Kyle, Mike, thank you again for joining us in this episode.
Thank you.
Thank you.
All right. See you soon. Bye. Thank you for joining us. We would appreciate it if you could do three things. 1, subscribe to this podcast, TA Intel. 2, share this podcast with your colleagues. And 3, leave us a comment on what you would like us to cover in future episodes. We hope you will join us again in other podcasts of TA Intel. And if you run an SBDC, corporate funds can be part of the mix of resources that can help you build a strong performing program, which can help lead to a successful accreditation review. To learn more about other key items for accreditation, you might want to consider participating in the Ascend Accreditation Accelerator. Here's a quick overview of it.
Welcome to the Ascend Accreditation Accelerator. This program is designed to help you streamline your accreditation process. The purpose of the Ascend program is to ensure you are fully prepared for accreditation. We will help you assemble the necessary documentation and understand the standards. Through Ascend, you will receive tools for development, management, and benchmarking. You will also get samples, interview exposure, and an assessment tool for your program's operations. The program includes 7 on-demand webinars detailing the Ascend model process. It also features 6 live peer learning sessions on Wednesdays. Ascend provides 3 key tools and essential resources to demonstrate meeting the standards. A key item is the Accreditation Documentation Tool. This helps manage the materials to include in the self-study. The program also includes a benchmarking tool with charts and data to compare your performance against peers. You will use the Ascend Key Components Assessment to review strategic thinking, planning, and program results for learning and improvement. You will learn from veteran SBDC leaders with real-world experience, who will share proven and tailored approaches to manage your program and achieve accreditation. Registration for the 2026 Ascend Accreditation Accelerator cohort is now open. Be sure to register before the deadline on August 7th. You can find more details and registration information at www.taadvisors.org/courses. For more information on the Ascend Accreditation Accelerator or any of our services, please contact Christian Conroy.
TA Intel is a production of TA Advisors, LLC. Copyright 2026, all rights reserved. For more information, visit taadvisors.org.